Welcome back, everyone. I am joined by Jim Wilson, the assistant sports editor, high school sports editor for the Telegram Gazette and Home Team Magazine. Willie, bunch of good games to talk about this
week.
Yeah, and we're going to start with 1 versus 2. It's week 5 of the regular season. You have the number 1 team against the number 2 team in Leominster and Doherty. This one should be a good game.
It should be a great game because, like I said, you have the 2 best teams. Last time Leominster faced number 2, it was St. John's in week 1. So, I mean, they've always been experienced at these big game mentality things. Doherty is a big game for them, obviously, because this is one of those statement games. If they beat Leominster, after Leominster's had test after test passed, I mean, that's a big game for them. Because all of a sudden people are talking about Doherty finally being for real.
Right, and so if you're Doherty, you still have a lot to prove. If you're Leominster, you've been trying to prove yourself each and every week, and you mentioned wins over St. John's, wins over Lowell, so they've already had some huge, Super Bowl-like feel games. Now, Doherty's had some big games, nothing this big, though, yet this season. So this will be the biggest game the Highlanders will have played this season. How do you see it shaking out, the 2 quarterbacks, Neil O'Connor and Luke Brennan for Doherty?
It looks good because you put it on paper, that you put those skilled players on both sides, it matches up pretty well. I mean, you have O'Connor and Brennan can take over games themselves. O'Connor's legend grows every week. All sides of the ball. He did everything but drive the bus last week. I mean, he just keeps getting better.
Yep.
Brennan, he's one of the best arms in Central Mass. Has some great weapons. Darko and Yidam. I think he has some good running backs. 5 or 6 guys that can run the ball.
Jakari Carpenter's a legitimate big threat.
You can't put those guys in the box against him because you have to respect the pass.
Yep.
He's getting better at reading his receivers. I think Leominster. But like you said earlier, Leominster's been tested. I mean, that St. John's game, Lowell, 2 blur teams. It was like, okay, what do they have? They passed those tests pretty well. They really do. They took control of the game. Shepherd Hill, another game, totally different offense, a double wing, very physical. They had no problem with that. Last week against Wachusett, running-based team, they passed that one. So this is the first time they get to see like a spread team, somewhat similar to what they have. The line could come down to this game. Whoever blocks better gives the other quarterback time to throw and prepare. They could get the win. Yeah,
it'd be great if this came down to the final possession. Whoever has the ball last wins. St. John's and Shrewsbury. This last year, now this is a unfamiliar position for St. John's because they're going after revenge now. Shrewsbury beat them last year. They beat them at St. John's. These guys all know each other. The Shrewsbury kids let them know that it was our town, and that's what this is always the battle for. Who runs Shrewsbury?
Exactly.
And they were saying, the Colonials last year after they won it, and rightly so, we won, we run the town. St. John's wants revenge.
It doesn't take much to motivate anybody in this game.
No.
I think, especially the way last year's game, that kickoff for Jay Reynolds running it back, he's sort of stunning them, which is, I think set St. John's off a little bit. Obviously, they recovered. I think this, like you said, a lot of motivation for him this year. St. John's coming off a tough win over Fitchburg the week before. I think they handled it really well. Obviously the Neshoba game, huge win. First time in 29 games since the last time they beat them in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. So I think St. John's is finally starting to figure out what's working for them. They're happy. This could be a 100-point game with Shrewsbury because I think both offenses are phenomenal. Shrewsbury's healthy, getting healthy. They're between McVane and Campanelli. Whoever they want to put under center is going to do the job for them. I think I think Shrewsbury is playing St. John's exactly when they want to.
That's the big thing. I think the key is that Shrewsbury's healthy now, or at least healthier than they've been since the start of the season. And McVane, he's going to be a huge weapon offensively, but he may make more of a difference in this game on defense than he even does on offense. Obviously, Shrewsbury needs to get some pressure on Drew Smiley and make him throw the ball quickly because if he can sit back there, he has so many weapons. Meanwhile, Shrewsbury can play a physical game too, and one of the strengths of that team for Shrewsbury is the line. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Shrewsbury trying to just go between the tackles, pound it down the field, ball control, clock-consuming drives.
DiLiberto and Jalbert could have big games. Like I said, to be honest, I think Fitchburg's line outplayed St. John's line 2 weeks ago. And Shrewsbury did a great job controlling Fitchburg, getting the win last week against that line. So Shrewsbury's line going against St. John's line, I might give the Shrewsbury the push there. Should be interesting to see what happens, especially those 2 good running backs Shrewsbury has.
Now, a rematch of last year's Super Bowl, Leicester and West Boylston. West Boylston won the Super Bowl a year ago, but Leicester coming off their biggest win in probably 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer than that. They beat Auburn last week for the first time in a long time.
Since 2004. That's, families are raised in that time, in the great state of your town of Leicester. So I think that was a huge win for Leicester because I'll be honest, and we were talking before the show, Leicester going into Auburn is going to be a tough game. Leominster without Mazio, one of their biggest weapons, I had to give the edge to Auburn on that one, which is no disrespect to Leicester because I think, in Griff we trust. They're a great team.
Right.
But having that disadvantage going into a good team like Auburn, I think that said a lot about Leicester last week with the Roderick show coming in. Tommy Roderick just running over people, showing why he's Division I material. I think that was a huge win for him. His serve notice, they just took it. You know, it's been a while since Auburn was out physical like that.
Yes, and this is an Auburn team that the week before had manhandled Northbridge, and Northbridge's line is much bigger than Leicester's line. You know, you're talking about a huge line at Northbridge. Leicester's line is not a big line, and Auburn, they just absolutely manhandled them the week before, manhandled Northbridge. Now Leicester comes out without Drew Mazzio, probably co-MVP, Mazzio and Roderick.
Definitely.
And if you're defensively, you're looking at it going, okay, we just have to stop Roderick. Now we don't have to worry about the quarterback who's one of the best in the business at throwing and running the football. And Leicester still comes out and comes out with a great win. McKay's another good player for Leicester.
You know, it just says the list grows of who the stars were last week for Leicester, because they think they really, it's almost like they put it on. Nobody expects us to win this game. They came out, not only did they kept it close, they did the job. I mean, that's great for Leicester to get that win. Big test against West Boylston, the team that's finally starting, a lot of new players from that Super Bowl team. Key one, obviously, Brian Hayes, Mr. Everything for them. I think, you know, he's going to be a big key for them this week, but they're playing really well. Those new players are getting locked in. I think the West Boylston is ready for this challenge too.
All right, Quabbin and Westboro is our game of the week, and it features Dan Orlando, Dylan Kierman, two very good football players, two great competitors. You have Quabbin that's playing real well right now, is a good record. You have Westboro looking for their first win, but a team in Westboro that has played real tough competition and almost beat Hudson, an undefeated squad right now.
And you know what? And it shouldn't surprise anybody. They always play tough. Remember last year they beat the Wachusett team. And I think that was a great win for them. They play really well in games, you know, the tougher the game is for them. And like you mentioned that Hudson game, a couple bad breaks, a couple turnovers, they could have walked away with that win. You look at, you know, the last week against Marlboro, they were up at half. It was close to halftime. They were up at halftime. That's another good showing from them. They're getting there. So I think if Quabbin comes in, and let's be honest, Quabbin hasn't looked like that dominating team the rest of those Division IV teams has at times. I mean, the overtime win against Oakmont was a big win. Was a big one for him, because Kierman just came out and played like Madden, 503 yards passing. Central Mass record. That's insane. And I don't think Westboro's worried about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We'll get into the quarterbacks in a second. Dan Orlando is a guy that I think any coach in Central Mass says, I'll take 11 Dan Orlandos and we'll beat any team out there.
And they almost have 11 Orlandos through the years.
That's a very good point. Is it 6 Orlandos?
About that.
I think it's 6 Orlando boys, and 5 of them played football for Mark Ellis. I mean, it's incredible. And he's the last of them, the last of the Orlandos. So it's an incredible story there for Westboro. Looking at the quarterbacks, you and I were talking about this earlier in the year, but some of the top quarterbacks in Central Mass, there are some great ones. Dylan Kierman, you mentioned Central Mass record for passing yards a week ago. He's a kid that went to a few camps in the offseason, went to an Ohio State football camp where he said he learned a ton about reading defenses, about using his legs when he throws a football, because he said he used to throw it all arm. He has one of the strongest arms around. But now, mechanically, he's refined some things, and now accurate, even a stronger arm, like longer on the deep ball. But he's a real student of the game.
And which helps a lot, especially when he has like guys like Copolino and Thyden, guys that have played with him for years. I mean, you talk about all the time in the pros, you know, like why was Brady and Welker so good? Because they sort of knew, you know, just to look down the side, you can see which, I could beat this guy inside, throw me a post, whatever. They're getting that kind of relationship with his receivers, which is huge, especially in high school. You don't really have that too often. Usually you guys get senior year, you're good, you sort of graduate and you start to cycle over again. See, so he's just, you can see him becoming a great quarterback over the last couple of years. He was great last year. He's even better this year, which is scary.
You got about 15 seconds for each of these next 3 quarterbacks. Drew Smiley, Neil O'Connor, and Luke Brennan. Real quickly, maybe 10 seconds for each quarterback. Smiley, O'Connor, and Brennan, again, I think just phenomenal QBs.
I think I like Smiley because he can do it with both. I mean, he's just as much a threat to run you over for an 80-yard touchdown as he is to pass it for one. I think Neil O'Connor, one of the best athletes in Central Mass. He did it last year. Receiver, defensive back. He smoothly transitioned to quarterback, not even missing a beat. And with Zaris there, they have a good 1-2 punch over at Leominster for that quarterbacks. And Luke Brennan, we talk about him every week. I mean, just great. He loves to roll out in that pocket, find the open guy for a big gain. He's learning real fast. He can hit those quick gains out for just as big of a score. Yeah, a lot of good weapons. All right, Willie, thanks as always, and we'll look forward to next week. Grady gave us a little extra time, so we got to talk about the QBs. All right, we will be back with more of the Frenzy Extra right after this.